book. We're going to start on the forward. We're going to start with the forward and work our way through it. The sections that we'll be going over in this book will be Marxist theory of mass action. Section 2 would be development and underdevelopment. So he's going to go over the two differences and what they mean. The pedagogy of ours. And then the building of socialism, where we're going to get into Ujamas in Tanzania, scientific socialism, class contradictions. So it's going to be great. This book is only 289 pages long, but it's very good. Next book after this, we'll be reading How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And then after that, we'll be reading Grounding with My Brothers. Oh my gosh, I have to translate this. It's not fair. I am void. Yep, that's the translation. I am boy. New book. Yep. All right, everybody, here we go. And it's gonna be weird because now I have to get back to. Ooh, the pages smell good. Hey, soundbite Sean. We're gonna start Decolonial Marxism today. Very good book. All right, so we're gonna do the forward. Walter Rodney's completes Marx. I'm gonna try this. The Nangua Wa Theogongo. Colonization, with all its interlinked economics, political and culture, and even psychic dimensions, has been central to the making of capitalist modernity. It was the new colonies in the West that fueled Atlantic slave trade, with the African body as a commodity, and slavery, with the African body providing unpaid labor for the colonial plantations, and racism, and with all the dehumanization of the African body in mind. Negation of the African humanity. All these fuel the underdevelopment of Europe. All these fuel the development of Europe and the West. The major cities of Europe were built by riches from slave trade, slavery, and colonialism. There, three of the major nuclear powers today, the USA, Britain, and France, were also major players in enslavement and colonization. Western modernity, we're going to look at what modernity is rooted in the looting of a continent. Let's look at what modernity means, because it just brought up twice. Why not? And I love it because now I don't have to pause the live. I like that. All right. MODERN. There it goes. Modernity. Means I looked it up before. This dude is a postmodernist. I don't fucking care what you think of Walter Rodney, fuckstick. Quality or condition of being modern. All right. Cool. Jeffersonian style of anarcho-syndicalism. Bro, why are you following me? Okay, great. I'm glad I'm a postmodernist. How about this? Hey, how about I do this? How about I do this? No, actually, you know, give me, yeah, keep going. But one of the most frequently propagated colonial methodologies is that of European and of the West having developed Africa. All the major thinkers of the European Enlightenment, from Hume to Kant to Hegel, advanced the same thesis, also embodied in missionary and explorer narratives about the continent. The myth continues today, with the West seen as the donor to Africa. It was Walter Rodney who best articulated the refutation of that methodology in his own universally acclaimed classic, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. This and Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth are really the basic material for helping make sense of the contradictions which still haunt Africa and all the formerly colonized of Asia and South America. The African post-colonial elite is very perspective of their phony identities, francophone, anglophone, and lusophone, but they are never protective of the resources and of the continent. 90% of these resources include diamond, gold, oil, copper, cobalt, uranium, are still owned by Western corporations. Africa, the biggest continent in the world, continues to be the main donor to Europe and the West. See the contradictions. Europe gave Africa the resources of their accents, the basis of those phony identities. Africa gave Europe access to the resources of the continent. Accents for access. Let me make sure. I gotta hear that word real quick. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly. Hold on a second. ACCE. Let me hear this word real quick.
Accent.
Yeah, I'm right. It is accent. Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad I'm right. No, not power off. What I need. Why did it do that? Erg. Trying to turn up the volume, everybody. Hold on a second. Why am I not finding the volume to this? There we go. All right, cool. Access. That is really the story of Africans' underdevelopment by Europe. Well captured and analyzed by Walter Rodney. Rodney was able to do this because of his Marxian approach to history, which enables him to see clearly the intertwinement of economics, politics, culture, and values, which under capitalism rests on the primary contradiction between labor and capital. But he was able to add the racial and colonial dimensions of this. Race, gender, and colonialism were integral to development of capitalism to its current stage of global imperialism. Colonization is colonizer and colonized. So decolonization at the economic, political, and cultural and psychic levels has to evolve both the colonizer and the colonized. Even our methodologies need to be decolonized from their Eurocentric basis. Marxist class analysis needs a dimension of race and colony and gender to complete it. These essays, Decolonial Marxism, will be an important companion to our continued learning from the same Pan-African mind that shows us clearly how Europe underdeveloped the continent, with the dimensions of race and colony added as class analysis. Rodney completes Marx's theory of mass action. I know the guy got a mark because, yeah, he's weird. Anybody's willing to take him out. Anybody can. Yeah, sure. Mass action and Marxist theory and mass action. Here we go. The brief contribute to Amilcar Cabral. Amilcar Cabral has plenty of books that are out. One is called Violence of Decolonization, I think, but Amilcar Cabral is one of the things that people should probably read on. Pretty good. In Amilcar Cabral, Africa had a giant who in Amilcar Cabral, Africa had a giant who bridged the gap between theory and practice, and hence represented the embodiment of revolutionary praxis. Cabral was a theoretician of the highest caliber. but only because he was involved in changing the ugly realities of colonized African society. He supervised a people's war of liberation with great distinction, but only because of the soundness of his scientific worldview and his capacity to apply its penetratingly to the social relations of Guinea-Bissau. A few pages with Cabral devoted to an analysis of the African societies in Guinea-Bissau are of extraordinary perceptiveness and authenticity. There we go. This is understandable since the accuracy of the interpretation was literally a matter of life and death. The massive task of mobilization that the African Party for the independence of Guinea and Cape Verde, Partido Africano del Independencia de Guinea y Converti. So that was PAIGC. So that was just a different language. So strictly achieved was based on a correct appreciation of such niceties as the relations between youth and elders among the belated people, or ties between a quasi-feudal Fulua lord and his aliens, or the role of the, oh my gosh, itinerant. What is that word? Let me look up this word. Itinerant? That's a weird word. I-N-T. Is it E? N-E-R-A-N. Itinerant. Traveling from place to place. Quasi-feudal Fulua lord and his aliens, or the role of, here we go, itinerant, traveling from place to place, itinerant political mobilization. The military conflict has in turn been decidedly resolved in favor of the PAIGC in most parts of the Guinea-Bissau. It is the element of commitment which sets Cabral apart from the common run of intellectuals who boast of being study towards the maintenances of colonial rule by writing, quote, intelligence reports, end quote, for the occupied power. Cabral was serving as an intelligence officer of the Army of Liberation when he unraveled the, oh my gosh, intricacies of segmentary lineage groups and the stratified social formations which exist in Guinea-Bissau. The fact that the Portuguese colonial regime was virtually falling apart in contrast to the surging growth in an area of encompassed a revolutionary transformation of the peoples living along socialist lines. Now, nationalism, in a sense of national liberation, can lead to bourgeoisie, but that's why Cabral says that we need to draw on socialist lines and transform it into a revolutionary thing. Yeah, so that's not, yeah. It is this revolutionary transformation that was the supreme objective of Cabral's eyes. This, he stressed on the innumerable occasions when he stood before the villagers of Guinea-Bissau, when he put it to them that, here's his quote, independence is not just a simple matter of expelling the Portuguese or having a flag of a national anthem. The people must be secure in the knowledge that no one is going to steal their labor, that the wealth of the country is not going into somebody else's pocket. Even today, the Guinea people the Guinean people stand naked and are still afraid of the river, the rain, and the forest. We tell the Guinean people that by their work, the river will be tamed and the rain will be put to good use. End quote. Here, there's only 6 people here. Okay. Here was a straightforward language meant to fortify against further manifestation of neocolonialism, the growth of national bourgeoisie, and the perpetuation of ignorance and fear among the masses. Cabral saw that the nationalist struggle chronologically preceded the socialist revolution, but that it was imperative to prepare for a subsequent socialist revolution from the onset of a national phase. See, the national phase needs to turn into a socialist revolution, because again, nationalist liberation can go into can be a bourgeoisie thing if it's not taken care of and transformed into a socialist one. Armed struggle was the unavoidable path to the liberation of Guinea, yet politics has remained in command throughout. The PAIGC has consistently involved itself in the cadre formation, mass mobilization, and the creation of a democratic socialist structure and attitudes. All of these programs benefit from the long-term vision of Amilcar Cabral's leader of the PAIGC since its inception in September 1956. For those of us who aspire towards a deeper appreciation of historical dialectics, Cabral analyzes our models for study. No one doubts, rather, even the skeptic can remain unimpressed by the strength of flexibility of his arguments concerning the role of respective strata and classes within Guinean revolution. Cabral broke away from the rigid categorization of this and that class is, quote, reactionary or revolutionary. So it's either one or the other. Instead, he was concerned with the dual revolutionary/reactionary potential of most of the elements involved in the nationalist struggles. We examined the specifics of Guinean society and pinpoint the methods by which revolutionary potential could be realized under the guidance of the PAIGC. Frantz Fanon, perhaps more than anyone else, is responsible for popularizing the notion of a revolutionary nature of African peasantry. Speaking at the Frantz Fanon Century in Milan, Cabral found it necessary to caution that while the peasantry had the greatest objective interest in struggle, the peasantry was not a revolutionary force. Rather, it constitutes a principal physical force available to the armed struggle. That's like I'm reading on Lenin, and Lenin talks about how the proletariat, the peasantry, and other forms that are revolutionary need to be together to do things. Hey, Nine, I said your name right. The contradictions between himself and Fanon is more apparent than real. What Cabral is warning against is the facile conclusion drawn by some that the peasants will be spontaneously revolutionary. Bitter experience has shown that, you can tell I'm changing the page, shown that this is not true, this is not true even for the industrial working class, in spite of the highly socialized nature of industrial production. Cabral has in effect renewing the battle against the concept of revolutionary spontaneity and restating the case for painstaking mobilization by the most conscious elements. Then, and only then, would the peasantry become a revolutionary force. Great political leaders derive their stature from their relationship to a given social class. Usually when that class is on the ascendant. In this instance, Cabral's greatness is tied into the forward movement of the laboring population of Guinea-Bissau, Africa, and the developing world. Not only is he a product of and spokesman for that movement, but he has been an active agent in molding the force of change in an anti-imperialist direction. Indeed, one can say that Amilcar Cabral still remains an active agent working against imperialism, both through the legacy of his thought and in the structures he left behind. It would be idle and dangerous to deny that the enemy still has the capacity to sow division and cause confusion within Guinean liberation movement. Cabral's own assassination is a testimony of this effect. But at a certain point, a movement becomes irreversible, and all the efforts of the enemy smacks a desperation and of, I don't know how to say this other word, but someone can say in the comments another word for insanity. Please tell me a different word, because I can't remember. As hopefully maybe Doodley's here and can tell me one, and maybe someone else can. As we have seen in the last days before, the Vietnamese people achieved their historic victory over U.S. imperialism, victory in Guinea-Bissau, for the popular force in Angola and Mozambique, is the only justification that Cabral would require, and in all fronts that victory is in the making. Wildness, thank you. Doodley is here. Hi, Doodley. Foley, thank you. That chapter was called, hold on. All right, that was a brief thing of Amilcar Cabral. Next is mass action. Masses in action. Masses in action. Over the past decades, Guianan has been stirred into a state of constant self-examination. The result, however, have been merged and disappointing. Meager and disappointing, largely because the discussion has been confined to the period after 1953 and to the personalities, failures, and recriminalization of the era. There is a tact assumption that only in 1953 did mass involvement of Guianese, I can't say it, political affairs begin. National political leaders arise and racial suspicion and strife finds expression. Guianan's history began a long time ago. Even the beginning of the 20th century is an arbitrary and not entirely satisfactory point in which to take up the story of the Guianan masses. But it does allow some scope for at least an interim examination of the Guianans' past in terms which are relevant to the working class. That's the whole point of historical materialism, is we observe according to the masses and how they develop history and how they make history. By the end of the 19th century, the net result of nearly 3 centuries of varied activity by internal forces on the Guianan mainland has the creation of a small society limited to the coastal land, to the production of sugar, and to all that went with sugar in terms of class stratification. Today, the fundamentals of the situation remains unaltered, with sugar accounting for more than 40% of the national revenues. Yet the old colonial system had its critics, the most serious of all possible critics, the working masses. It is the contention here that both the marginal modification of the entirely sugar-bound society and the hostilities invoked by that society are to be traced to the years after 1900, and in particular to the period of the First World War. Yeah, the book is the bauxite. So we're gonna go over bauxite, it looks like. And let's look at what bauxite is. It might tell us, but let's do it anyways. Bauxite. What is bauxite? Oh my gosh, I did it. Bauxite is
the main source of aluminum, a naturally occurring rock. It's used to make aluminum, which becomes aluminum metal for things like transportation, construction, and electronics. And it's also used as an abrasive.
All right, so if no one heard that, bauxite is a primary ore in aluminum, a naturally occurring rock composed of aluminum hydroxides. It is mainly used to produce aluminum, I don't know if I'm saying, which is then smelted into aluminum metal and used in products like transportation, construction, electronics. Bauxite is also used as an abrasive, in other industrial applications. So that's bauxite. Sweet. So let's move on. Bauxite. In the economic sphere, the principal supplement to sugar in Guyana today is bauxite. At the outbreak of the First World War, a number of mining concessions were issued when geological evidence indicated that the expensive deposits of bauxite were likely to be encountered in Guyana. The largest concession was held by the Demerara Bauxite Company, which was registered locally in 1960, backed by American and Canadian financial interests. The Demerara, it's E-R-A-R-A, sorry, Bauxite Company built the town of Mackenzie before the end of the war. And earlier in November 1919, there was a Chronicle report that company had just exported 1,500 tons of bauxite, its fourth shipment. All Guyanese welcomed the discovery of bauxite, but there was a revealing debate about the role of American capital when it was ascertained that the Northern Aluminum Company of Toronto, of which the Demerara Bauxite Company was a subsidiary, was merely a facet of U.S. capitalists. Primarily, the question was posed in terms of British imperial interests versus those of the United States. And in fact, the British government suspended the granting of mineral concessions in Guyana during the latter stage of the war, with the hopes that British capital would give a better account of itself after the struggle in Europe had ended. But there was also an underlying assumption that the Guyanese press that local interests could well have been jeopardized by U.S. capital, and local entrepreneurs demanded the opportunity to be allowed to raise capital and take the initiative in the bauxite industry. As it turned out, the North American financiers and industrialists had the field to themselves. The Demerara Bauxite Company quickly joined forces with and took partial control of, oh my gosh, I'm gonna do my best, Spirostonson. I have no idea. What is that? I wonder what that is. I don't know. Do. Let me make sure what this. Let me make sure I'm saying this word right. If it lets me say it. Yes. What is this? Okay, it's the land. It's okay. It's not letting me do that. Hold on a second, everybody. Let me do something real quick. Oh, I gotta take off that. Turn you down a little bit. Okay, let me get back to it. Sorry, buddy. It was very, very. Okay, where was I at? I'm going to reread from here, I think. Oh, no, right here. I couldn't say it. It's SPROSTONS. I couldn't, it wouldn't let me say it. So I'm sorry, everybody. The most important engineering and shipping firm in Guyana at the time. And together they came in to dominate the Demerara River, and with it a significant section of the economy. Growth of U.S. imperialism in Latin America. Stimulated by wartime conditions, trades between Guyana and the United States was on the increase, and imports from the U.S. were rapidly outstripping imports from Britain. Guyana was but a small part of the process of development taking place in the whole Latin American and Caribbean area. In Jamaica, the U.S. had gone further towards capturing the local markets than in any other British West Indian territory. While the While in Suriname, it was also U.S. capital, which had started the bauxite industry. This new U.S. offensive was a further stage in the decline of European influence in the Southern Americas, a process which started with the Haitian Revolution. The 19th century had already shown that European decline meant replacement by the U.S. domination. This situation was being seriously discussed in the Caribbean and Latin America at the end of the First World War. The Aragos gave prominence to the discourse by the Argentinian intellectual on the dangers that were imminent because of the U.S. imperialism. All the British West Indian islands were particularly concerned that the British were planning to relinquish their Caribbean possessions to the United States. The answer is this new threat they felt was a federation, though curiously enough, this too was invested in broad hemispheric terms to include Canada. Subsequently, the hope of federations were dashed, while the fear that the British would relinquish their possessions to the U.S. were fully justified in every respect except that an international law. Simultaneously with bauxite, the more glamorous attraction of diamonds was presented. By 1922, the diamond industry was flourishing, accounted in value for 1/4 of the exports of Guyana. Since gold had been discovered in 1882, with rubber and balata, which I don't know what that is. We're going to look that up too. We're going to make sure we know what these things are. I know what rubber is. Of course, everybody knows what rubber is. For a little group. Okay, so that word, it's BALATA, can refer to a rubber-like material from the Malaccara, it's somewhere, tree. Oh, it's the type of tree. Okay. Providing further incentives, and with bauxite and diamonds in the offing too. It is not surprising that the, quote, bush required a new meaning for Guianians. I can't say it right. And the habit to looking inland was probably enhanced by the partial breakdown of the traditional relations with Europe, which the war affected. During the war, people keenly debated the feasibility of such schemes as the road to link up with main Pan-American highway and a railway deep into the hinterland, while the economic survey of the Rupununua region was purposed. The parallel with Guyana of 1966 is striking. The interior can be seen as represent in the consciousness of the Guyanans an escape from the insular, a colonial relation of the narrow coastal strip. And incidentally, it is clear that the masses are taking the initiative in the matter. This consciousness of for obvious geographical reasons, is absent from the island of the Caribbean. But it is not unique so far as the mainland territories are concerned. The modern historian sees the most characteristic elements of Latin American history as being its, quote, El Dorado spirit, end quote. And that spirit was perfectly amplified by the Guyanans, quote, pork knockers, end quote, as well as being shared by those who remain behind. All right, I see a lot of things going around here. Someone being anti-black. Wow, that's weird. Precious little emerged. Wait, precious? Why is saying precious little emerged out of the hope that the interior offered Guyana a brighter future? All that came of the scheme of communication with the hinterland was the Ripuna Cattle Tract, which was opened in 1917. The gold rush of 1880s has declined considerably in the earlier years of the 20th century. Mushroom companies had collapsed as yield proved unremunerative, and the diamond industry was to follow a similar pattern. Both minerals continue to produce regular revenue, but the scale of operations was small. At a glance, it seemed that oh my gosh, I can't say this dang word, I'm so sorry. The Guyanese had overestimated their resources, but it was those who believed that the country had only minor, oh my gosh, I don't know how to say this word. One of these days, I'm going to be able to pronounce things better. Alluvial, which means related to or derived from alluvium. So this is alluvial. So alluvial deposits of gold and diamonds, but no supplies at great depths. Who were living in the world of fancy, the woeful ignorance and apathy of the colonial regime militated against the rational utilization of Guyana's resources. Indentured immigration. Which person? Walter Rodney's a black man. Here, hold on. Now, Walter Rodney, this is Walter Rodney. That's Walter Rodney. That's that person right there. So yeah, Walter Rodney's a black man. A black professor. Especially in the guise of, African studies and also liberation. So yeah, he was a professor. Yeah, so yeah. No, it was a commentator. Oh, my bad. Indentured immigration. Indentured. So meaning like, what this might mean is like in some African countries, what we'll find out either, I don't know if through this book or through other books, we'll find out that what colonies do, what imperialists, what capitalists do in other countries is they displace the indigenous community out there, the original people. And they bring in immigration from other countries to displace those workers and to displace those people from being able to engage in production and like making of commodities and work. So like they do that on purpose because, yeah. Indentured immigration, the conception of change with the Guyana's workers entertained during the war was by no means restricted to the exploration of the interior. One of the number of vital fronts they were prepared to wage a struggle against the forces of oppression. One of their most crucial battles was for an end to indentured immigration, and subsequently for the prevention of exploitation of the same ilk. There were veiled indications of the Guyanese press that when McNeill and Chaimin Lal, the two commissioners for India, visited Guyana in 1916 to investigate the indentured system, they were carefully guided to their sources of information, and there were strong assertions on the part of this is people from India, Indian and black workers, that they had struggled uncompromisingly against the system of indentured. The commissioner's report was not decisively condemnatory. Why am I having hard times with words today? I don't like how my tongue can't say words. Condemnatory. I can't say it. Condemnatory, which means expressing strong disapprovals, not decisively condemnatory. But in any event, 18 April 1917 saw the arrival of the last two ships bringing indentured immigrants from India. By the time that the last indentured contracts were served, all sectors of the society became nominally free. Indentured, unlike slavery, was consistently produced free citizens in large numbers, some of whom were repatriated at the expiry. It's another word. Jesus. EXPIRY. Expiry, the end, okay. Expiry of their contracts. Indeed, the rate of repatriation, which is making them repatriation. I can't say it. Repatriation was quite high. In the 20 years between 1891 and 1911, a total of 36,016 Indian immigrants returned home, compared with the 65,764 who arrived during the same period. Many of the Indians who remained in Guyana, like freed black peoples, moved away from the sugar estates and attempted to set themselves up as an independent peasantry. In 1990, 30% of the East Indians earned their living outside of the sugar estates, while by the 1911, less than half of those laborers brought to Guyana, in the interests of sugar industry were still to be found on the sugar estates. The population of Guyana in December 1917 as 314,000, out of whom 137,000 were Indians, and only 62,000 of them were laboring in the sugar estates. So that's the thing. All right, next we're moving on. Jesus Christ. All right, who we got here? I don't know why these people are in there. Rice. Now we're going to rice. Rice provided the basis for the East Indian withdrawal from the sugar plantations. Some African slaves and other descendants had planted rice in Guyana and elsewhere, but it was not a crop that was widespread in West Africa. In contrast to India, from where the indentured immigrants brought techniques of irrigated rice farming. As early as the 1905, Guyanese rice imports began to drop. Shortly afterwards, the local rice industry was not only taking care of the domestic consumption, but also exporting. Under wartime conditions, the rice industry was able to set its sights clearly on exports because it was easy to capture the West Indian market, which was starved of food imports. In Guyana itself, there were food shortages, making it necessary for an embargo to be placed on the export of rice in 1917. However, in March 1919, permits were once more issued for the export of rice to the West Indian islands, so that the rice industry emerged from the crucible of the war in Guyana's second agricultural activity. Now, if you're in the request, you're going to be in there for a long ass time. Just want to let you know that you're going to be in there for a long ass time. Naturally enough, the East Indian peasants wanted land. The planters and government attitude towards the settlement of indentured immigrants on small holds was not initially favorable, but both in Trinidad and Guyana, they were prepared to grant small amounts of land if this would keep labor from returning to India. Besides, the land had to be properly drained and irrigated for rice farming, and the crops needed to be financed and marketed. All these problems have only been successfully tackled in the last few years, so that for decades the rice farmers waged a constant struggle against drought and flood, and against the voraciousness of the Georgetown merchants who advanced credits and then brought the paddy of rice at ridiculously low prices. Yet for all this, the East Indian peasants like the ex-slaves who had managed to set up free villages in Guyana, had to some extent escaped the toils of plantation system. And it is probably significant that, according to Chadar Jawardarendin, quote, the Indians of the rice growing villages considered the Indian plantation laborers to be disorderly and immoral, end quote. Throughout the Caribbean, the heritage of sugar is one of degradation. I don't know why these people are staying in the thing. Not bringing you guys up. Indian middle class. These are people from India, everybody. They're from India. These are actual Indians from India. While the mass of the East Indian population was either laboring on the sugar estates or in the rice fields, there were also small numbers of merchants and professional men of the race already prominent by 1917, precisely because indentured had long been producing free citizens. Clearly, such individuals had already acquired interests quite different from the East Indian workers and peasants. It was an East Indian landowner and rice miller, Gyandian, who was a principal opponent to the scheme of setting up a cooperative rice mill when this was proposed late in 1918. His intentions was that the peasants should be entirely dependent on him, and he issued a thinly veiled threat to increase the rent of the ground and the houses of the East Indian peasants, over whom he held a whip hand. Oh my gosh, Veeraswamy, a Georgetown lawyer, was accused of hypocritical posturing. Oh, hold on a second. I gotta look at this word. It's an easy word, it's just throwing me off. Could I hear it? Posturing, I was right. Hypocritical posturing when he called upon the East Indian workers of Guyana to fight for king and country, while allowing himself to be persuaded that he was too valuable an asset to Guyana to risk enlistment. However, it was the small East Indian section of the middle class to whom the indentured and ex-indentured immigrants looked for guidance and leadership. And in turn, the lawyers and merchants sought to articulate the interests of the East Indian community as a whole. For instance, when there was a serious disagreement on a sugar estate, the laborers would trek to Georgetown and seek the assistance of a prominent individual like Laku and Veerasyami. And that's the end of that. Radical consciousness. All right. It appears that by the 1890s, the East Indians had begun to consolidate some sort of community life. By 1917, there were 46 mosques and 43 temples, while only 2 temples had been seen by royal commissions in 1870. The end of indentured, though not as decisive as the end of slavery, produced a new wave of communal feeling among the East Indians and Guianan. One of the products of which was that British Guiana, Guinea East Indian Association The idea was put into practice on the initiative of Mr. Mudhu La Fuso, I can't say the name, and others signatories of the first circular called for the formation of an association where J. Vapri, Ram Perswad and Schwa, and E. Kanwal, J.D. Rowe, M. Ishmael, A.S. Rohaman, and Peter Rohaman, and that's the end of that sentence. Sorry, I can't say their names. On 13th of February, 1919, the association came into being with Mr. J. Laku as the first president. The aim and objects of the British Guinea East Indian Association were the social, intellectuals, and moral improvement of its members by means of debate, lectures, writings of essays, and the provisions of liberty and recreational facilities. After some disagreement, it was decided that the association should also indulge in political activities. The association also pushed Indian opinion as its official organ, championing the cause of the East Indians in Guyana. In addition, there was a keen interest in the affairs of the Indian subcontinent. The editorial of an earlier issue of Indian Opium, published in May 1919, dealt with the recent disturbance of India and the affairs of the Indian National Congress. There was a simultaneous resurgence of black radicals consciousness. It was also linked to the end of indentured since discussions of the role and status of the East Indians in Guyana inevitably involved comparisons with black people. But even more decisive was the impact of the Black American struggle. The government twice attempted to pass legislations in 1918 and 1919 against the importation of American black literature, which was widely read in Guyana's black masses. The end of the war saw the attempt of an Pan-African movement to lobby the peace conference in France. Meetings were held in various places, notably in the town halls of Georgetown and New Amsterdam, to discuss the questions of sending a delegate to Versailles. Letters to press lectures and sermons on the problems of black people were all common. The problems of black people were all common, drawing frequently on the examples from the U.S. By 1923, the black masses had formed organizations such as the Georgetown branch of the Universal Black Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey's the African Community League, and the Black Progressive Convention. The relatively small Portuguese community also sought to organize itself around the Portuguese Benevolent Society. There was much talk among them of their Portuguese, patrimony, of the need to preserve the Portuguese language in Guyana, and of the desirability of Portuguese political parties. The class struggle. The next one. Am I getting a lot of haters in here? Is there a lot of fucking haters in these motherfuckers? Jesus Christ, every time I read a book, there's a bunch of haters in these fucks. The class struggle. Coexisting with the emphasis of racial identity was a powerful upsurge of class consciousness. The Reverend M.A. Kosu, speaking at Mackenzie in February 1919, remarked that, quote, If, as President Wilson has said, the world must be safe for democracy, the relations between capital and labor must be for the best. Yeah. 3 months later, the permeable to the resolution of workers in Georgetown proceeded as follows, quote, that this meeting of the working classes in the city of Georgetown and the delegates from various associations of working classes in the electorate of the countries and the demariers and Esquimbo, Berbice, and the town of New Amsterdam expresses, etc. These are typical expressions of the awareness of the fundamental class contradictions in society. Next one, raising prices. During the war, prices had rocketed. The commission appointed to prepare a report on the salaries of the civil servants found that on average the cost of living had increased by 150% by the 1918. What improvement would the end of the war bring? This was a principal question posed by the Guyanese, I can't say it, as the conflict in Europe neared an end. In December 1918, shortly after the armistice, and previous November, Reverend R.T. Frank, a great champion of the workers, warned them not to expect too much. In particular, he was gloomy but realistic in his assessment that the cost of living would not fall. He urged the formation of labor unions, and it was precisely the high prices of goods during and after the war that forced the workers to organize themselves. Dockers' agitation. As early as 1905, H.N. Crinchlow was 18 years old and a dock laborer, conceived with some other waterfront workers the idea of going on strike for higher wages. It was put into practice that very year, participating widespread rioting, which was answered by the guns of police. Then, when another attempt at strike action was made the following year, Crinchlow was the spokesman of the dock workers, was brought before the city magistrate on the charge of, quote, preventing a laborer named Abraham Ritchie from earning an honest living, end quote. The charge was dropped, but so was the scheme for striking. It was not until 1916 that a new move was made. The hours of work for waterfront laborers at the time were 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. with the interval of 1 hour of breakfast. The dockers determined that the hours should be reduced and that the wages of 64 cents per day should be increased to 84 cents. With the help of J. Sidney MacArthur, the Georgetown barristers, and Nelson Cannon, a member of the Court of Policies, they prepared a petition to the government. When this failed, militant strikes actions gained the workers their demands. The first success of the waterfront workers in 1916 was an empty one, since prices continued to spiral. And in September 1980, they returned to the attack, led once more by Crinchlow. They demanded increases for both casual and full-time workers, a different system of payment, and a reduction of hours. The dockers bargained astutely, drawing up a detailed cost drawing up a detailed cost of living index showing the increase in the prices of foodstuffs and other essentials. Working a full six-day week and 69 hours, regular employees could earn a maximum of only $4.08 per week, which was manifestly inadequate when placed against the cost of living index. The Chamber of Commerce, which handled the negotiations for Booker's and others Water Street firms, claims that they were not responsible for the rise in the price of basic foodstuffs, and they were at first prepared to grant an increase of no more than 1 shilling per week. The dockers were adamant and won their point in the final ladder, conceding victory to the workers. The Chambers of Commerce added honestly that quote, the council hopes that this will place a period on recurring demands, end quote. The length of the dockers working day then stood at 9 hours. The quote 8-hour day, end quote, became the next rallying cry for these workers, and claims for this were pressed on the Chamber of Commerce early in December 1918. The Chamber had already hinted that they intended to call a halt to any further improvements in the lot of the dockers, and they now express extreme regret and surprise that the laborers, within 6 weeks of a generous and liberal concession of all the terms demanded in their petition dated 16th September 1918, should again approach the chamber for further concessions. The merchants claimed that since the beginning of the war, the scale of payment has risen by nearly 100%. And to knock off 1 hour from 9-hour day would mean, in effect, another increase of 10%. The chambers continue rejection of the dockers' claim for the 8-hour day was categorically leaving no room for bargaining. Thus, in January 1919, militant strike actions was decided upon leading directly to the formation of British Guyana labor unions. All right, that's the end of that section. The British it's not Guyana, it's Guinea. Guyana. Let me make sure. Hopefully it'll let me say it. Come on. Here we go. Guiana. Guyana. It is Guyana. Okay, good. The and it's called the BGLU. So the BGLU is a British Guyana labor union. Okay. The BGLU celebrates its anniversary on 11th January, but the organization, which was in existence on 11th January 1919, seems to have been no more than a porters union, and an unofficial entity called into being by the waterfront strike. It was on 6th April. So this is thank you. 6th April. So like they're reading these like the English people, like British people, they put the number of the day and then the month and the year. So it's a little bit backwards. 6th April, that the meeting was held at a unique friendly society in Regent Street, at which Crinchlow proposed a resolution for the establishment of a labor union. And this was carried. Two representatives of bookers were also invited, and from them came the suggestion for the formation of industrial councils for settling disputes between the dockers and the Water Street employers. The three-man council met shortly afterwards and recommended the 8-hour day and certain wage increases. Out of the agitation, the dockers arose an organization which transcended their own struggles. As one correspondent to the Agrossi pointed out, the tense post-war labor situation in the world at large, which was regularly treated in the Guyanians press, could not help but influence the Guyanians proletariat. The Guyanians proletariat. I'm sorry. Whew, this is hard. Thank you. It is a testimony to the revolutionary mood of laborer throughout the land that requests started pouring in for membership of the BGLU from various parts of the country. On April, a meeting at Victoria, East Coast Demerara, decided in favor of a labor union branch for the area. The following months, the workers of Bagotville, West Coast Demerara, followed suit. These were typical examples of movements that led to the rapid establishment of a countrywide workers' organization. All sectors of labor were involved, including tradesmen. The first president, Mr. M. Hosanna, was a tailor, and there were even jibs of residence and alms of house or old people's home were allowed to join the union. This came about because the union was also a friendly and brutal, burial society, thus grafted itself on to one of the oldest forms of social organizations that the masses of Guyana had experienced. The BGLU had a wide base of direct industrial action. The latter portion of the 1919 and most of the 1920 witnessed a succession of disputes and strikes involving, among others, the railways, the electric companies, the sawmills, sugar estates, the agoras, and docks. I'm going to look that word up. Another word. What does that word mean? A-R-G-O-S-Y. Argosy, a large merchant ship, originally one of Ragus. Now, oh my gosh. Okay. So it is Argosy and the docks. The pressure of this agitation carried on by manual workers was significant to gain advantages even for the Water Street clerks, though it was not surprising that these white-collar workers never showed real loyalty to the workers' movement. The first annual general meeting in 1920 was something of a fiasco, and the union nearly disintegrated. Membership fell from a peak of 13,000 to a few hundred, but the union continued to function as a pressure group. By 1923, the delegates to the General Conference could look back on a few years of solid achievement. One union campaign had led to the passage early in 1922 of the rent restriction bill. There was a rumor in January 1923 that the Rent Act was about to be repealed. The workers prepared to resume the fight if necessary. This was one of the several ways in which the workers indicated that they would use the union to undertake tasks other than wage negotiation. The resolution of the 1923 conference aimed at the establishment of a voluntary organization to provide advice which would prevent the masses from indulging in petty litigation in cases which could be settled out of court. Another principal concern was with unemployment, against which the petition was organized. Perhaps the most ambitious of the moves taken by the BGLU was its attempt to convene the first ever West Indian Conference in 1920. Unfortunately, only the Trinidad Working Men's Association was able to send the delegates. The remaining territories expressing willingness but inability to attend. The chance to develop a common West Indian perspective for the labor movement was therefore lost. The workers' struggles in Trinidad were closely watched. In Guyana. There we go. Guyana, not Guyana. Guyana. Sorry. Rural resolution. It is necessary to stress that the awakening among the Guyanese masses was countrywide and not simply confined to the activities of the urban workers in Georgetown. The BGLU took an interest in plantation laborers also, though its activities on the plantation were severely limited by the managers' opposition to their laborers joining the unions. East Indian laborers, for the most part, continue to use Crosby and the immigration department to voice their problems, asking prominent Indian lawyers to intercede on their behalf. This was by no means a passive arrangement. Both the Crosby and the Indian lawyers had to meet huge deputations. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I need to work on pronunciation. It's one of my weaknesses. Hold on, I gotta see what this word says. Deputation? Is it deputation?
Deputation.
I was right. Deputations is a group of people appointed to undertake a mission or take part in the formal process on behalf of a larger group. Deputations who arrived in Georgetown from the particular plantations or area where the grievances were felt. Often the whole plantation staff left in mass, as happened in 1917 and again in 1924 with labor from Rumveldt. On the latter occasion, there was an encouraging unity between rural and urban efforts. 4,000 Indians and black people started to march on Georgetown with flags, sticks, and their tools. Some to meet Crinchlow at the BGLU office, and others to immigration department to complain about irregular wages. Apart from the formation of the labor union, the initiatives on the issues concerning the well-being of the masses came from the rural peasantry. The chairman of the Victoria Institution remarked in April 1919 that, quote, Georgetown looks to the East Coast to decide its political matters, end quote. And the facts did bear out this situation. The weapons which the rural proletariat and the peasantry fashioned for their struggles included credited banks and agricultural societies, while the village councils and the village chairmen's conferences provided forums for the expression of the will of the rural masses and their determination to confront the planter class. In February 1919, the Attorney General accused A.A. Thornton, a worker's representative in the combined court, of wanting to see a set of Bolsheviks in some village led by the village chairman. In reply, the chairman of the West Bank Cultural Society noted that the Attorney General has brought in the ominous Russian term. The question was one of capital and labor. Labor was represented by the farmers' conference and the village chairman's conference. Cane farming. One of the most significant trends during the war era was the development of the system of cane growing on the peasant farming basis. In 1897, the Royal Commission had recommended grants and aid to cane farmers. Very little was done by the government to implement the report, but farmers and sugar planters worked out private arrangements on some estates. The farmers faced considerable difficulties, such as the transportation of their cane to the factories and its unloading, but they organized themselves to overcome these problems and to win higher rewards for the sugar estates that purchased their product. In March 1919, the cane farming movement proposed legislations to regularize the relationship between the small cane farmers and the estates that bought and milled his cane. They pointed to Trinidad, where there was a small amount of legislation passed on the subject in 1902, though that the Guyanese farmers would have preferred was the extensive code, such as that which was the existence in Queensland, Australia. Cooperative credit banks. Alongside the cane farm system, there sprung up the cooperative credit bank movements. Since loans over the period from sowing to crop time were essential. In fact, credit facilities played an even greater role in the young rice industry. A number of cooperative credit banks were established earlier in the century, but they became really important as the cane farming movement intensified, as the rice industry grew, and then the popularity influenced local government board took over the scheme in 1916. At the end of 1915, only 3 banks were registered. By the end of 1916, they had increased to 18. And by 1918, there were 26 cooperative credit banks in existence. The number of shareholders increased from 220 in 1915 to 5,815 in 1918. And in the same period, the working capital had risen from $111 to $28,020. And the operation of the Anna Grove Clunbrooks cooperative credit banks can be taken as a typical example. During the year 1918, it issued loans to 156 shareholders, amounting to $2,508. This extended over periods of from 1 to 12 months and involved sums of from $5 to $20. Clients were chiefly paddy growers, along with provisions and cane farmers, hucksters, coconut oil makers, and small businesses. Their efforts were obviously small, since there were narrow limits to what could be wrung from the colonial regime. Reactions to the plantocracy. And I'm guessing that's the plantation, but we're going to look it up anyways. Just to make sure. I think I got it right.
Plantocracy.
Yeah, got it right. Plantocracy. A population of planters regarded as a dominant class, especially in West Indies. So the planters are the ruling. All right, good. So the reactions of the plutocracy. Every one of the tendencies so far pinpointed represented a direct or potential threat to the old colonial system. The opening up of the interior and the end of Indian indentured, the rise of cane farming, and the organization of the proletariat were all seen by the plutocracy as undermining the structure of the sugar society. In the 1890s, the gold fields were opened. The sugar planters found great difficulties in maintaining a steady supply of labor at the wages they offered, and this was a situation which gave rise to a loyal commission in 1896. But the recommendation of the commission that crown lands should be opened up by peasants, that anthem to the planters. According to J. L. Lesser, a Georgetown solicitor, quote, the crown lands were locked up and kept from the people's reach for many years because it was thought by the planters that anything done to settle the people, anything done to settle the people on the land would tend to take away labor from the sugar estates, end quote. That was common knowledge among the masses. But at the end of the war, I swear to God, my mouth has so much, it's like salivating so bad. By the end of the war, the planters were more anxious even than ever because bauxite, baleta, rice, gold, diamonds, cane farming, and irrigation schemes offered alternative employment to Guyanese workers formerly bound to the sugar estate. The planters therefore embarked on a counter-revolutionary offense. After 1896, commissions, the proprietors of Veryheads, Lust, Barbess River, encouraged the cultivation of canes on their estates by farmers and lands being given free of rent. This practice was adopted by a number of other estates. In December 1918, the cane farmers were suddenly told that they would have to pay $9 and $12 per acre. No notice was given. Neither was there any increase offered to the farmers and their canes. La Beaume Mare was the only estate which did not pursue this reactionary policy. In vain did the farmers propose alternative schemes for the continuation of cultivations of estate lands. That what the planters wanted was an excuse to introduce legislation to further immigration, the only method which they knew to maintain the hierarchical plantation system. They took the land out of production, which the cane farmers were eager to work, and within a short period, the Bearbice alone, the estates of Adelphine, Canefield, Bath, La. These are different things. Retreat, Highbury, Gladstone, Halls, and Everton were closed, ostensibly because of the shortage of labor, when in fact there were many people willing to work if only the starvation wages were increased. Go figure, right? Go figure. The colonization schema. Let's look up what schema means, just to make sure, because they've been using that a lot, and I forgot what it meant. Let's look it up. It's a British English word. A large-scale systematic plan of arrangements for attaining a particular object or putting in a particular idea into effect. So it's just basically implementations and like, okay, got it. So like, let's read that. Yeah, okay. Early in the 1990s, the chairman of the Planters Association approached the Attorney General claiming that there had been a reduction of 6,000 acres in the cane industry, and that there was a prospect of greater reduction in planters did not get new supplies of labor. But of this request was born the Colonization Bill, which aimed at introducing into Guyana another influx of cheap laborer, preferably from India. The planters introduced the measures at the time when wartime defense of the colony colonial regulations were still in force. Thorne complained that, quote, it was manifestly unfair that when the laborers who were interested in the matter were told that they were not to deal with the matter as a result of the times in which they lived, that on the other hand, the capitalists could meet together and formulate a scheme, end quote. However, the workers refused to be gagged. They recognized the colonization scheme for what it was, an attempt to undercut local labor and keep them laborer and to keep them in positions of subjugation. They campaigned vigorously against the proposal when it came before the combined courts and warned that elected representatives that they should express popular opposition to the bill. The Chronicle editorial countered the saying that, oh my gosh, I swear to God, that the elective members would be very foolish to be terrorized by agitators who warned them not to vote for the proposal at a parallel of their seats. It hinted darkly that such actions would supply the strongest arguments for the creation of the Crown Colony government. Such threats did not stop the workers all over the country from making their positions plain. Every one of the anti-colonization meeting held all over the country was a success, while the pro-colonization faction found that their meetings were invariably fiascos. Although the combined courts did send the mission to England and India, nothing came of the colonization scheme. Nevertheless, it was the most important issue of public debate in Guyana and the end of the First World War. And it showed decisively how keenly the masses were assessing their colonial situations and how determined they were to put an end to it. In the mood they were in, nothing escaped the vigilance of the masses. When the government introduces legislation to ban the import of Black American literature. The workers fought this on 2 occasions. When a reactionary jury bill was brought forward, the workers again fought bitterly, though without success, and on yet another occasions, popular opposition nipped in the bud its proposal of the governors that a vagrancy law should be passed to coerce laborers to work on public works at ridiculous wages. The Constitution. A member of the type of political system exists in Guyana is necessary at this juncture. In 1891, the Court of Policy, which was until then a purely nominated body, was reformed to allow the elections of 14 members along with the 8 members nominated by the governor, who together sat in the combined courts. There were also 2 elected financial representatives, though the power over finance was constantly in dispute because it introduced a clash with the executive authorities of the governor. In any event, it took some time before the governing body reflected the change in the Constitution. The nature of that change being to give some representation to people of color and Portuguese middle class. They said the other one, but I don't know who they referred to, so I did it to be safe. People of, they just mentioned the other word. So I don't know. So I just did it just to be safe. All right. Given the very narrow and restricted franchises, it is obvious that the new representatives of the combined courts after 1891 were not elected by the workers and did not represent the workers, but some benefits were derived by having in the center of local political power a group of individuals who were opposed to the planter class and to many aspects of the old colonial system. For instance, as Raymond Smith noted, it is probably significant that the rice industry started at a time when the sugar industry was depressed and when the new middle class were coming into power after the constitutional reforms of 1891. Besides, the quote middle class themselves were not satisfied. They clamored for more control over the affairs of the country, especially in the financial spheres. And as so often happens, they encouraged the workers to shout along with them to make as great a noise as possible. In the year 1916, appears to have been decisive. A recall movement was launched against the then governor, Egerton, who had become unpopular in Georgetown with the Georgetown merchants because he interfered with their unwholesome speculation in rice exports. However, the middle class played to a public gallery which had its own reasons for abhorring the colonial systems and its representatives, the governor. The workers too began to take up the cry for more democratic constitution and for the political program for their own betterment. As one correspondent of the Chronicle wrote on October 1918, it was a common thought among the poorer peoples of this colony that places under British rule do not make rapid progress. Until the policy of the country gets into the hands of the people through their representatives, it is bound to make slow progress. By the end of the war, the electorate was faced with a quote, Progressive Party, which was not an organizational unit, but an alliance of politicians that had emerged out of the recall movement with the intention of capturing all 14 of the seats, which were to be filled by elections. They identified themselves with the masses, and this itself was to provide grounds for disillusionment when they were successively elected. Hope everybody's already doing okay. Political influences of the masses. The influence which the workers wield under the limited franchises of the pre-adult suffrage era is usually underestimated. The physical unrest of the masses was a factor which has always to be taken into account. During the first 3 decades of the century, disturbances and riots erupt with great frequency, known as, quote, bread riots. One could not ask for more blatant examples of people asking for bread and being given bullets. The breathless haste with which the colonial regime read the Riot Act as a testimony to their deep-rooted fears of the mass action that they have inherited from the sugar planters and slave owners. Quite apart from the threat of violence, the workers made an impact through public meetings. Georgetown workers met under the auspices of the BGLU to discuss the relative merits of Percy Wright and P.N. Cannon, including that the latter was an enemy of the working class. Workers in New Amsterdam met the demand of Ustance Wilford should return to constituency and give the account of his stewardship in the combined courts, and especially to explain his ambivalence on the colonization bill, which the workers had denounced, while peasant farmers and East Coast Demeria met at Victoria Village, condemned the government in power, and agreed to form a, quote, a political association, embracing members from Anna's Grove to Bachelor's Adventures. All this was in a period after the recall movement and the formation of Progressive Party. And it may appear futile because the workers had no vote. Yet the popular clamor had its effect on those who held the vote, and those who appeared as representatives of the people. In 1923, for example, Cannon had lost the Georgetown mayor. Becoming mayor. Sorry, I can't say it. And while he himself retained the seat in the combined courts, the candidates whom he supported were all unsuccessful. Proofs that the impact of popular agitation against the colonization bill came when the government itself decided to hold a number of public meetings to win support for the measures. The workers simply invaded those meetings held in 1919 and passed resolutions of their own calling from improvements in sanitation, drainage, and irrigation, and wages before they would consent to further influx of immigrants. So they're asking for a demand. First of all, hey Mayo, I hope you're doing well. The suspension of the Constitution in 1928. Everyone felt that the Constitution of 1891 had outlived its usefulness. The quote, middle class, end quote, wanted more power, especially over the finances and the executive, while the planter class, having already ceded some of their authority to the middle class, and he has that in parentheses, by the way, and seeing the specter of mass power in more liberal reforms were granted, were willing to let the British Crown take direct responsibility for the colony in British Guiana. Dissatisfaction with constitutional forms was, in fact, general in British West Indies after the war, and resulted in the appointment of royal commissions, which visited the area and reported in 1922. Wait, what? I just realized I can't help with the pronunciation since I don't speak English. yeah. Well, it's been translated into English, but not American English, British English. The Wood Commission, as it was called, rejected the demands of the Guyanans planter class to take a step backward, but neither did it allow the presence of elected members to the executive as a progressive party requested. No important changes were made, so the election of 1926 were held under the Constitution of 1891. A.R. Weber, one of the Guyanans' few historians and individual who was himself personally involved in the politics of the period, wrote that the elections of October 1926 were, quote, fought with unexampled ferocity, end quote, and that, quote, the declaration of the polls showed a sweeping victory for the popular party and the complete and devastating rout of their opponents, who were well possessed of this world's goods, end quote. Because practically every seat was judicially challenged, and eventually 5 members of the Court of Policies were unseated, and legal technicalities. No doubt the Colonial Office was being informed of these developments, as well as the receiving advice from the planter group to put an end to the Constitution that gave power to the upstart, quote, middle class, and encouraged the workers to dabble in politics. Because as workers, as the proletariat, we seek emancipation from exploitation, we seek the control of the economy, and we seek control politically. As mentioned before, as earlier as 1919, there were dark hints that if the elected members allowed themselves to be influenced by popular agitators, this would, quote, simply supply the strongest arguments for a creation of a crown colony government, end quote. Again, in 1925, I said 52, this idea was publicly voiced by a governor of British Guiana when he returned to England, and in 1927, it was decided to put it into practice. No one quite knew what was the purpose of the commissioners who visited Guyana in 1927, at least not until the following year, when it became clear that they had been seeking excuses to suspend the Constitution. At any rate, the Constitution of 1892 was so radically changed that the effect was to remove all power from the elected representatives. And it is clear that even the small measures of representation under the Constitution in 1891 was seen by the colonial regime as a threat. Thus, in 1928, not for the first time, nor for the last, the constitutional coup d'etat was effected was affected to break local resistance to the British imperial system. So they're trying to create a colony because they don't like the freaking constitution that they brought up. So much for allowing countries to have their own democratic like things. Uh-oh. Vaughn, are you coming up? Holy shit, it's 8:20. Fucking hell. Oops. I didn't realize it's 8:20, everybody. I'm so sorry. Let me read this last couple pages and it'll be a different chapter. I'm so sorry, everybody. I'm so sorry. I went over. I'm enjoying the book, so I went over. Oopsies. I'll read 2.5 more pages. And then I'll be in. I'm so sorry. My fault, everybody. This is like the 4th time I've read this book. So, yeah, I'm trying to pick up on things. So let me read this one. Race and class. Insofar as a reflection on the period under discussion is understandably influenced by the present conjecture of circumstances in Guyana. It is obvious that the question of the interrelations between race and class consciousness is of the utmost importance. In the decade after 1955, these two factors proved antagonistic, and consequently an anti-colonialist struggle of the Guyanese masses received a serious setback. However, between the 1900s and 1928, the situation was entirely different, when it was the awareness among both Indians and black people of the peculiar disadvantages under which their own race labored that participated and attacked on the colonial society. Racial consciousness was mobilized when the group felt it labored under special disadvantages. Indian opium launched an attack on the government for keeping the East Indian masses in the state of illiteracy. It pointed out that of 20,000 children of East Indian percentage of school-going age, only 6,000 were attending school. This was branded as, quote, a neglect not only inexcusably, but culpable, end quote. On an issue such as this, communal anger was jointly directed against the colonial regime because the black masses were at that very moment waging a struggle to lay the foundation of a more democratic educational system, rejecting the, quote, payment by results, end quote, and other limitations which were in vogue since the elementary education ordinances in 1876. Incidentally, the struggle of the teachers, not only on their own behalf, but for the system of education which would benefit their pupils and then the country, is undoubtedly one of the most significant, magnificent in the annals of the history of Guyanans working class. Apart from the demands for more education, there was also some consideration given to the curricula. And one of the suggestions of the East Indian community was that Indian language should be taught. One striking features of the debate on the issues of the teachers association was the position taken by our French, who argued that unless they took steps to teach the Indian language, the latter would disappear as the African language of the slaves had disappeared, and the community would be the poorer. This and many other views on related topics indicate that the racial groups of Guyana, I can't say it, Guyana, were seriously addressing themselves in the examination of where they stood and what they possessed of value, and of what changes were desirable. At every juncture, they were unmasked the colonial society as an enemy. When in 1917 the East Indians succeeded to having marriage ceremonies by Molves and Pandits, recognized they had gained the victory over the white Christian capitalist conception of the society. And it was against this that the black masses too were directing their fire. They joined in the refrain of black people of the United States, that black people had fought side by side with whites during the war, and now they should be given new opportunities. It is extremely significant that colonial administration saw the association, such as Black Progressive Convention, not as racist groups, but as class formations. The lecturer from the United States was, oh my gosh, I'm gonna make sure I'm saying this word right. Ananthium. What is ananthium? Let's look at what ananthium is. Almost done, everybody. I'm sorry. This is my fault. Ananthium. A-N-A-T-H. There it is, ananthium. Am I saying it right?
Anathema.
Anathema. Something or someone that one vehemently dislikes. Okay, cool. An anthem, because it was being widely read by, quote, the poorest class of society, and it was suggested that the local branch of the Garvey's movement should be banned because it was Bolshevik. The Reverend Frank wrote in January 1919 that the black masses of Guyana, quote, the possibilities wrapped up in them and the powers within them are immense, end quote. This applied equally to the East Indian masses, but for the release of the energies of all concerned, there was necessarily a process of self-realization, which was taken place in the framework of racial grouping rather than the context of nation, quote unquote. That process of, here we go, communal self-realization did not inevitably bring the races into conflict, nor slowed the formation of organization along class lines, nor weakened the struggles against colonialism. What occurred in the period after 1955 was that communal awareness was for various reasons turned inwards and exacerbated racial contradictions among the Guyanese workers and peasants. I say, quote, exacerbated, end quote, because racial conflicts in Guyana was an inevitable concomitant that the fact that indentured laborers, East Indian, Chinese, and Portuguese, was conceived specifically to break the back of black people, opposition to planter class. Although the decades after Indian immigration, again in 1838, there were differences over wages between racial groups on the sugar estate, brought about by the deliberate policies of the planters of playing one group off against another. And that's what the United States does all the time, and that's what they do in different countries. That's what they do to different countries to destabilize them too. That's part of it. No doubt, racial conflicts fed racialism, and vice versa. And indeed, there are a host of other such interconnections that one could make. What is certain is that simple and definitive explanations must be given must give way to a more sober analysis of the complexities of the development of the Guyanese mass movement, of the relationship between racial consciousness and racial prejudice, between economic competition and racial conflict, between communal identification and class objectives. And that's the end. Or do chapter 3, Marxism and African liberation. I need a thing. Sorry I went over, everybody. I don't even went over. I'm supposed to be feeding Rufus already. Oops. Sorry, Rufus. I fucked up, Rufus. So we're ending on page... on the book 33. Hold on a second. Who's here? What up, Boyd? What up, Boyd? Did you not want to come up? Did you do it by accident?
How
well? What's up?
W book.
W book? Did you get anything from it?
I like it.
You liked it?
Oh yeah, I said oh, the friends would invite.
What did you say? I'm so sorry, I lost it because I was reading it.
No, I was saying that I just liked a lot of it. I said friends invite. Look, it's Doodley.
It's Doodley.
Hi, Boyd.
What up, Doodley? What would you like to say? Were you here for the reading?
I thought I absorbed a lot more of the book than I... Apparently, I didn't absorb much of the book because as soon as you asked me that, everything went out.
No, it's fine, Doodley. I think you did absorb it, and sometimes that's left me. I absorb the book, but then like when I come into conversations with other people, things will be brought up, and I'll be like, "Oh yeah, this came from this book," and this. So like it happens to me too. Usually when I'm asked a question, then I'm like, I can't answer it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I do the same. Like, I would read something and then someone would be like, "Hey, Void, what do you thought about this?" And I'll be like, what?
Yeah, he's going over. So I think Walter Rodney. Is he from Guyana? I think he's from Guyana, or was he from Jamaica? I fucking forgot. Where was? Hold on, I gotta go look this up.
Yeah.
Okay, hold on. I gotta do a couple things. All right, I gotta give my bookmark. Boom, there's a bookmark. All right, cool. Mark. Let me go find out where he's from. I think I have it in my notes. Hold on a second. I think I showed it to us.
Yeah, Guyanese.
Guyanese. I keep saying that wrong so much. But I think he was taken out of Guyanese because of that and put into like Jamaica. I don't know. I can't remember if it's the other way around or
Guyana.
But
he's from Guyana, but he's Guyanese.
He's from Guyana, but Guyanese. Yeah.
That's the like how you would call the Woodleyan.
That's fair.
I don't see the connection there. Sorry, Void.
I don't know, just being silly.
But do you see like how they bring in indentured servitude, people from other countries to displace regular workers and laborers, and especially utilizing these indentured servants that come from other countries to break up certain revolution and be actually counter-revolutionary to the people that are actually seeking liberation process. He mentioned it through the whole pages. We even see that when you read Settlers, you see that when they utilize like black laborers and indigenous laborers to break up strikes, to break the lines and stuff. Oh, what page? We ended on 33. 33. But yeah, like it's the same copy paste thing, right?